A glance in the mirror. Chapter 6. Work and War. Albert watched his eldest brother as he practiced the piano. It was all the encouragement he needed. It didn't take him long to reach the first grade. His teachers declared that he had a natural bent, teaching him both the theory and practical. Soon he was able to play the hymns sung at the school assembly. He was often required to accompany singers at Christmas time, and within a few years of diligent practice became proficient enough to play for the local film show, keeping pace with the black and white films. He continued to play for the rest of his life, reaching a very high standard. To have a piano in the house at the turn of the 19th century was the popular means of home entertainment. It was estimated there were between 2,000 and 4,000 pianos in Britain, one instrument to 10 to 20 people. It was a skill considered to be one of social inclusion, especially for girls. To be able to play well, able to accompany singers, entertaining company, was a skill of distinction. It was also a guarantee of inclusion, for a skilled player was always sought after for every social gathering. The piano in the parlour was not just a butt of jokes, but a matter of fact, and between 1877 and 1902 the Lost Chord sold 50,000 copies of sheet music per year, making Parry a very rich man. The family sing-along round the piano, singing the songs of the day from popular musical acts, operettas, national tunes and hymns, were looked forward to as a means of social discourse, bringing family and friends together. Even during the Second World War, every weekend it was Terry's task to gather the music together, sort out the tunes to be sung, and prepare the piano, making sure the action had been aired free from damp to stop the action from sticking. Visiting aunts and uncles were entertained by singing Cherry Ripe, The Tree, Miner's Dream of Home, and the Teddy Bear's Picnic. Albert added The Village Pump, Captain Ginger, and a selection from Gilbert and Sullivan. Bert stayed at school until he was 7 years old, when the family moved to Kensal Green. His next school, Princess Frederica High Grade School, had the sexes still separated. He recalled it was a miserable place, staffed by unsmiling, elderly teachers who were always stern and dressed as if in mourning. He was glad when he moved yet again to the London School Board at Amberley Road, Paddington. This school is still there and backs onto the Paddington branch of the Grand Union Canal. One end of the road is Harrow Road in Westbourne Green. It was now just 3 years after the end of the Boer War. Previously Britain had invested the empire with a rosy glow. After the war, the glow was not quite so warm. Although the period was one of growth, the necessity of putting back what the war had drained away became essential. The change in society was huge, especially for women. Workers didn't have to anymore. There was a definite improvement in the nation's health. Nevertheless, there was a feeling that the golden age of Victorian Britain was over. Britain's isolationistic stand ended when she agreed to a treaty with Japan in 1902, and then again with the Entente Cordiale in 1904. It was on the cards that Germany would force an issue with France. That moment came when the Kaiser sent his troops through neutral Belgium to attack. The Kaiser had felt intimidated by Britain, especially its empire. He might have felt better if he had been the family's head, but he wasn't, and never would be. Victoria had presided over all. Perhaps now, after her death in 1901, he could influence affairs and gain prestige. Now at last Albert was happy. The headmaster at the London School Board was Mr. Williamson, who, although strict, was kind and fortunately ably assisted by capable teachers in 6 separate classrooms. He could master the 3 R's and was taught elementary algebra, composition, drawing, geometry, French and woodwork. He had great natural affection for this school, never forgot the headmaster for his many kindnesses. Discipline was looked on as something essential, and the necessity of so to punishment for wrongdoing and slackness. There was a punishment book called the Board School Cane and Punishment Book. The children held this book in great awe, regarding it as a sufficient threat to deter misdoing. At the start of every day at school, a service was taken in the main hall, when prayers were said and hymns sung. At the end of each day, the same thing happened again. Pupils were expected to pay respect to their elders. Hats were raised and removed to masters and mistresses. Pupils had to say sir and miss when spoken to. When leaving school, caps were worn at all times. Albert played the piano for the school assembly, and in the evenings for the local picture palace, where silent films with subtitles were shown. This required dexterity and a knowledge of many tunes to follow each part of the storyline. English lessons were taught every day, and had as their main content spelling and note-taking. Writing with a copperplate hand was the standard, and practised constantly. Mental arithmetic was greatly encouraged. Every day calculations were given out as a test. Teachers taught all subjects and knew their charges intimately, their faults and failings, their successes and strengths. Whilst Bert attended this school, Queen Victoria died, and Edward VII was crowned king. All the children were given the day off to celebrate, and street parties were arranged. Later that year he joined the 6th London Company Boys' Brigade, which was attached to the school's church. The captain who ran the company was J. A. Robson, a remarkable man, enrolling more than 100 boys, most years winning the area cup and shield for band and drill competitions. The Boy Scouts training was based upon trekking and scouting. The Boys' Brigade in the manner of light infantry. The brigade, founded by Sir William Smith in Glasgow, was founded to instruct boys in good citizenship and physical fitness. In 1904, 54,000 boys between the ages of 12 and 14 were in the organisation. Baden-Powell became Honorary Vice President and Inspector General that same year. Both the Army and the government believed that here was an organisation that could be a source of recruitment for future officers and men of the British Army, making a third line of defence. The formation of the Boys' Brigade by Sir William Smith and the Boy Scouts by Baden-Powell was to improve the physique and mental health of young boys who might in the future become Army volunteers. Both these organisations and others like them gave the young, especially children in inner cities of Glasgow and London, something to work for and benefit by. Albert Carey joined the 6th London Company Boys' Brigade in 1900 at the age of 11. Sir William Smith set up the first company 17 years before, on the 4th of October 1883. The organisation quickly caught on in Glasgow, and the first company in London started soon after. The brigade's uniform aped that of the army: white haversack, brown belt, and pillbox hat. The bands of the pillbox hat were pipe-clayed, and the buckles of the belt and haversack polished brass. The lads conveniently kept their school uniform, plus lapel badges, and everyday black shoes formed the basic uniform. dummy rifles were issued to provide the necessary equipment for drill and parade purposes. All the drill commands and actions followed those of the Army Manual of the 1880s. In effect, taking boys from the age of 11 to 17 and producing a valued recruiting arm of the company's military establishment. Sir William introduced camping to continue the boys' socialization with each other during the school's summer holiday. Bert started work at the age of 15 in 1904, while still a member of the 6th London Company Boys Brigade. He was taken on as a 3-month probationary clerk for the Grand Central Railway Freight Department, attached to Paddington Main Line Station. He served out his probationary period, but unfortunately there was no vacancy for a full-time clerk. Thompson, McKay and Company, a large freight haulage company, held the license to deal with all the railway company's freight. They had their warehouse and distribution centre next door to the railway company. The Grand Central Railway Company suggested to Albert that he should transfer to this company, who were advertising for a trainee clerk. He applied immediately and offered an interview by return of post. At his interview he mentioned his membership in the Boys Brigade. This greatly influenced the selection board, who immediately recognized the dedication and discipline necessary to be a corporal heading up a section. They complimented him on his excellent school report and the railway company's recommendations, telling him that his application was likely to be accepted, which it was 2 days later. Office work included dealing with street accidents, claims for damages to goods in carriage, stoppages, overtime and bonus payments, accounts, detention charges, correspondence and ordering feed for the horses. In retrospect, if Albert had waited for a vacancy with the railway company and not gone to a private cartage company, he would have benefited enormously, both in eventual retirement benefits and his chances for promotion in later years. The cartage company then came under the jurisdiction of the district manager, who had stabling for 600 horses, a Miles Daimler 5-ton motor with iron tyres and rack and pinion drive, and a 10-ton Yorkshire steam wagon. All the horses were young, and some needed schooling. Young horse carmen, the term used for drivers, were given the task of breaking in these animals. As agents, Thompson, McKay and Co. carried out town cartage work as well as more general work. Orders for Lots Road Electric Generating Station was heavy speciality work. The cartage of 40-ton boilers needed a team of 20 horses harnessed to a heavy-duty wagon. Steam engines were used to drive beam engines, then as tractors and engines moving heavy freight for the mining industry. Albert enjoyed his work and was interested to learn more outside his normal duties. By this time, his various tasks included visiting local markets and the docks, learning how to service extra heavy loads, and this started his never-ending love for London, its streets and all the businesses that went on within its boundaries. He was keen to learn every skill to improve his knowledge. Gradually, more and more motors took over the work from horses. Drivers had to service and repair their own vehicles, new parts and lubricants ordered. Throughout this period he kept abreast of all the latest methods. For personal satisfaction he drove every vehicle and got to know its workings. In 1905 the Carey household was headed by the eldest son Alfred, who was 20, and Sidney, the youngest, who was 5. It was a family of 6 boys and the 4 eldest at work and 2 girls. In 1881, the first child was born and named Thomas, as was the family custom. He died in his second year. Elsie, the second eldest girl, had also died in her third year. Lillian, who was 16, was the eldest of the two remaining girls. She stayed at home to help the mother. The family had moved again, this time to Kensal Green, a suburb of Paddington. It was a necessity to find more room to accommodate the 8 children. The following year, soon after his 17th birthday, Albert turned up at the Kensington Volunteer Rifle Corps headquarters by appointment, to fill in the necessary forms and take part in the medical. If these were accepted, the recruit had to swear allegiance to the Queen. It had been a bit of a wrench leaving the Boys' Brigade, for he had been a keen member. It had been 8 dedicated years, taking part in all the drill competitions and playing the piano for the Sunday Bible readings. He left at the same time a number of friends did, having discussed joining the Territorials. It was an auspicious time, not that Albert and his friends realised the significance. The Kensington Rifles, now adopted by the Royal Borough of Kensington, and granted permission to take the borough's coat of arms mounted centrally within an 8-pointed star as a cap badge. Colonel A.J. Hopkins, V.D., was the commanding officer for a further year. The Kensington Volunteers moved to a purpose-built headquarters at Adam and Eve Mews, Iverna Gardens, Kensington, in 1908, now under the command of Lieutenant Colonel A. Sutherland Harris. Albert's newfound interest was to become his absorbing hobby, to last him all his life, taking him through the ranks until he became their regimental sergeant major. Sir Edward Grey, the Foreign Secretary of the minority Liberal government of Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman, appointed Richard Haldane to the post of Secretary of State for War. Grey had committed the British Army to go to the assistance of France if attacked. He appreciated that to have this promise kept, the cause would need a strong pair of hands to ensure the army was up to the task. After much studied thought, Haldane concluded that an expeditionary force was needed and settled on 6 infantry units. These 6 units required further support to cater for leave, sickness, casualties and deaths. Haldane supported his suggestions by having drawn up 2 field service manuals implemented by the new Director of Staff Duties, Douglas Haig. Volunteers from universities and public schools, trained by Cadet Corps and the University Rifle Corps, filled the officer vacancy list. Bert and his friends went to Trafalgar Square to see the huge screens erected, displaying the projected election results. It was agreed by Parliament on the 31st of March 1907 that a sum of £2,353,000 be granted to His Majesty to defray the charge of barrack construction for works, buildings and repairs at home and abroad, including the purchase of land. This was a bill acknowledging that something had to be done about modernising the army, improving the living arrangements, and on the eve of war there were 132,000 private cars on the road. It was realised by the Chancellor, Sir John Broderick, that the army was not capable of fighting a protracted war without the support of additional troops. It was at this point that volunteers were enlisted. The Liberal Secretary for War, Haldane, set about forming the Territorial Force. These volunteers were mainly local business people, craftsmen and professional, lower and middle class men, trained at weekends and at the summer annual camp. Viscount Haldane engaged Colonel Ellison to be a member of his staff to set about organising the expansion. A year later, the plan was completed. In January 1909, the Army Council declared the Kensington Battalion should become a line regiment, bearing colours, relieving the battalion of its rifle designation. The battalion was brigaded with the Queen's Westminsters, 16th London, Civil Service Rifles, 15th London, and the London Scottish, the 14th London, in the 4th London Infantry Brigade. Lord Truro and Lord Ranelagh decided on a grey uniform with red facings, a shako with a glazed peak. The belts were to be black, and the uniform trimmings were of buff laces with silver appointments. To contain an assortment of necessary items, a starched white haversack completed the uniform. They were to be known as the Grey Brigade, mobilised for home defence at the start of the war, although the uniform had been regularised to khaki some years previously. The regiment's headquarters was situated close to the home of Princess Louise, daughter of Queen Victoria. The regiment, inquiring if Princess Louise would associate her name with the regiment, approached King Edward VII. He was generous enough to give his consent, although it took a further 4 years for this to come about. The princess took a lively interest in the regiment, organising the design and production of the regiment's colours. The colours were duly consecrated and presented to the regiment by King Edward VII at Windsor on the 19th of June 1909, and thereafter the regiment was referred to as the 13th London Regiment. Haldane, 1853 to 1947, told General Sir Ian Hamilton on the 27th of July 1914 that he was to command the Home Army. Previously he had been Inspector General of all forces, home and overseas. His immediate duties were to defend the nation and mobilise the Territorial force, who were at summer camp. This he accomplished rapidly, forming battalions, brigades and whole divisions, ready to replace regulars in overseas garrisons and fill up depleted ranks after the initial fight in late summer. Sir Ian considered the 1st London Division Territorial Force to be of exceptional value. The Territorial Force was under no obligation to serve overseas, but in fact most men did. Burt found the Territorial Force very little different from the Boys' Brigade. The discipline was the same, so too the drill.